Welcome to the weekly report. It's February 11 and I'm Robert Barwick. In today's news, Prince Philip's love child to chair Gillard's new Climate Change Commission. The LaRouche Youth Movement today has exposed Ross Garnaut as an economic hitman. The CEC stirs up the South Australian Forestry protest in a good way. And finally, the MurrayDarling Basin fight heats right up. So first, Prince Philip's love child to chair the Climate Change Commission. If you still doubt that Prince Philip is the driving force behind green genocide in the world, today he's laughing at you, because the new Climate Change Commission that Julia Gillard has set up, mainly because her election idea of some kind of citizens' assembly on climate change was laughed out of town, probably because people knew that if the citizens actually got to assemble on climate change would be laughed out of town. So Gillard set up this Climate Change Commission as an alternative. It's stacked chock full of greenies, a supposedly independent commission. And who was picked to chair it? None other than 2007 Australian of the Year, Tim Flannery, Professor Tim Flannery. Prince Philip's love child. Why do I say that? Tim Flannery is Australia's leading advocate of depopulation genocide. He's the man back in 1994 who first said we should radically bring Australia's population down to 6 to 7 million people. Tim Flannery is not just a co-thinker of Prince Philip in this regard. His entire influential base, the kind of logistical support that he draws on in order to spread this idea, comes from Prince Philip's organisations. Principally, he is an international trustee of the Worldwide Fund for Nature, founded by Prince Philip and the former Nazi Prince Bernhard and the eugenicist Julian Huxley. Flannery is a patron of Sustainable Population Australia. Now, if you've read our literature, Sustainable Population Australia was the spin-off of Prince Philip's Australian organisation, the Australian Conservation Foundation. It was set up to hammer the issue of population reduction in a focused way, and it's the organisation that advocates things like a Chinese-style one-child policy for Australia and an absolutely racist immigration reduction program specifically to stop people from third world countries coming here for the reason they state, because there is a risk that if people from the third world come here, by living in Australia, it will raise their levels of consumption by raising their living standard, and of course that will destroy the earth. So that's a convenient cover for what is actually nothing but racism, which is lawful because it originates in the eugenics movement. So this is Tim Flannery. He's Prince Philip's love child, and when it's just the latest example in him being appointed to this position, how every major green push in Australia for the last 40 years has come directly out of Prince Philip networks. So let's see what Tim Flannery gets up to, and maybe this will make you rethink your questions about whether that dottery old fart in Buckingham Palace really does have this influence. Read our New Citizen on it. All right, secondly, on the subject of climate change. Today, the LaRouche Youth Movement exposed Ross Garnaut as an economic hitman. Now, I alluded to this last week in the report. Read today's press release, which gives the details on it. That press release was distributed today at an event at Crown Casino in Melbourne, which Ross Garnaut addressed, very early morning event, 7 a.m, hosted by none other than Professor John Quiggin, a dear friend of the CEC. I feel that way anyway, John. Quiggin is one of these economists who've sold their soul to the City of London and become just total flag wavers for climate change. So anyway, he hosted this event. Garneau spoke at it. The LaRouche Youth Movement intervened. They mass distributed copies of today's press release at the event. They questioned Garneau from the floor and were shut down immediately. Most of them were frog marched out of off the Crown Casino premises by security, because even though Garneau is delivering official government documentation here to push climate change again, they deliberately held this event at a private venue such as Crown Casino, and perhaps the word Crown is more than symbolic in this case. So that gave them the right to just completely shut our intervention down and frog march them out of there. However, it was still had the desired effect, because all the people sitting there listening to Garneau, I wouldn't say rabbit on, because rabbits talk faster than Garneau. He's a fairly boring speaker. All the people listening at least had something interesting to read about where this guy's really coming from, because the gist of what we say is Garneau's job has nothing to do with climate change. They're not going to solve global warming because it's a fraud in the first place. His job is to force Australia into the next stage of economic looting devised by the City of London to prop themselves up, and climate change, carbon trading is that agenda. So that was hammered very hard today. And I believe we have a picture of the event.
It would make it rather difficult to bring in an emissions trading scheme with a floating price initially.
Now I'll move on. Thirdly today, this week the CEC stirred up the South Australian forestry protest, and we put out a press release about this. You can read the details of what's happening in South Australia. We sent a contingent over to Adelaide, which was comprised of the leading state secretaries of the CEC and Lord Jan Pacullis and Western Australia's Jean Robinson, to meet up with a bunch of local CEC supporters to attend a fairly large rally. More than 2,000 people, mainly from the forest communities of Mount Gambier, etc., rallied against the privatisation of the forestry rotations in South Australia, which privatisations will totally destroy their industry. They know that. Our presence was not just because it's a protest issue. This is one of those issues that goes to the heart of why we have declared a war of liberation against the British Empire. The systematic annihilation of Australia's industrial base is gathering pace, and this is, like I said, another example of that. In this particular case, it's all the South Australian forestry privatisation is being directed by the Royal Bank of Scotland, one of the inside banks of the Inter-Alpha Group itself, which is the modern British Empire. And it specialises in these types of privatisation, so they're dictating to that. We went to make our presence felt and give people the benefit of our analysis on this, including the just totally absurd fact that the stated reason for the privatisation is so South Australia can retain its AAA credit rating. Who gives a stuff in this day and age about AAA credit rating? Haven't we learned from the global financial crisis? Lehman Brothers, collateralised debt obligations, credit default swaps, all the things that are bringing down the world economy right now were all AAA credit rating by these same damn international ratings agencies. And the people of South Australia have to be sacrificed, the industries of South Australia has to be sacrificed so the state can meet that stupid criteria. So it's a salient point. That's the message we delivered, and the fact that it's British in origin. Now, probably the most important proof of how important our presence there was the incredible reaction, which was a hostile reaction, we got from the supposed organisers of the protest, the Forestry Division of the CFMEU, the Construction, Forestry, Mining and Energy Union. They went off their head at us being there, and from the microphone delivered all kinds of slanders at our presence, calling us Nazis and all this kind of rubbish. Why? Well, it's simple why. Their job as a union is to, yes, put on a protest, but a token protest at the prospect of job losses, to kind of soak up the anger from the community that people are feeling, but make sure at all costs that people are convinced to stay inside the tent, if you will, of support for the major parties, in this case, in the Forestry Division of the CFMU's case, the Australian Labor Party. They fear, they're terrified that at a certain point people will wake up and realise both major parties are ramming this down their throat, and there will be a mass exodus away from those parties to where? Well, they know where. That's why they direct the vitriol at us. And this proved that. So thank God we were there, because if this protest was left up to the Forestry Division of the CFMEU, those people in South Australia, in Mount Gambier, may as well start packing their bags right now. If they take notice of what we said, we can fight this and not just save the forestry industry of South Australia, save the country. Finally, just a quick report on the Murray-Darling Basin fight. It's actually heated right up. There's been two developments this week. First, the Victorian government, Victoria's new Liberal government, and I'm not singing their praises, however, they have made a submission to the parliamentary inquiries on this, and in their submission they have questioned the science behind the shutdown of the Murray-Darling Basin. This is a very important development, because until we started loudly questioning the science and protesting the science and denouncing it as quackery, which you've probably seen our cartoons on that, no one was questioning it. The Victorian government have now questioned that science, and they've questioned the criteria by which rivers are declared healthy. And of course that criteria is wetlands. That Prince Philip's wet dream of wetlands is how they're declared healthy. So the Victorian government has done that. Now why? Are they good all of a sudden? No way. The Victorian government, however, is only the Victorian government because they sniffed something after the last federal election. And what they sniffed was that the public are very, very afraid of the sellout to the green agenda. And Ted Baillieu made a decision before the state election to not preference the Greens ahead of the Labor Party, which was seen as a courageous decision, and it went against sort of the political grain, if you will. However, it was done because they were starting to get a sniff that, hang on, the sellout to the Greens is, if it continues, the public are going to roast us. And so they made that decision, and it got them elected. And now you've got that realisation has led them to say, well, hang on, we can't then get elected and continue to sell out the Murray-Darling Basin. This fight's not over. We can't overstate how good they're being, but to question the science, the first time officially the science, this environmental science has actually been questioned, is a key development. Secondly though, to prove that the agenda is one way or other to shut down this food bowl, Tony Burke yesterday has foreshadowed that if the farmers don't voluntarily sell back their water to the government or the Murray-Darling Basin Authority, the buybacks may have to become compulsory. Now, that's no surprise to us. The farmers were promised they'd never be compulsory, so they're in shell shock today. But it's no surprise to us, especially because of all the work we've done and what we publicised in particular about the Ritzer report, because of what the Ritzer report into the bank's intentions of the Murray-Darling Basin showed, is that one way or another, whether by the Murray-Darling Basin Authority buying back the water or the banks forcing their clients among the farmers to sell their water by calling in their loans, they would achieve that outcome. And so this is what's playing out now. We are having an impact on the Murray-Darling Basin fight. It's putting them all on the back foot, and so they're forced to sort of show their real hand with statements like this. Just to show you how callous and calculating this intention is, though, in the Ritzer report, in the full Ritzer report, a bank informs Adrian Ritzer that they know what to expect with this Murray-Darling Basin reform. And they know what to expect in terms of the impact on farmers. How? Because they experienced it in the dairy deregulation fight a decade ago. And what did they experience? They experienced something like, in certain areas, a farmer a week committing suicide while the reform was being rammed through. And so with that experience under their belt, these banks are perfectly aware of what they're going into and perfectly prepared to do it. So whether it's the banks doing it, or whether it's the government doing it, at all costs they're going to shut this thing down. So this fight's not over. We are having an impact, but remember, it's not just about a single issue of stopping the Water Act, which we have to do. It's about saving the country, and it's the CEC's input and only our input that's going to make people see it in the right light and actually act on it that's capable of stopping that. So that's the weekly report for this week. As you see, there's been pretty action-packed. There's a lot going on. Let me just say, we need your help to continue this, to make it work. So join our fight, become a subscriber to our literature, get involved, and that's how we win this. And otherwise, stay tuned for more developments.